The Nintendo Switch era from March 3rd, 2017 to June 5th, 2025 is drawing to a close, and it's been one of the best console generations for JRPGs since the Super Nintendo era in the 90s. This video is focusing more on the time period than on the Switch console itself, so while the majority of these games are playable on the Switch and a few are exclusives, I'll also be talking about games that aren't playable on the Switch. Many of these games did begin as Switch exclusives before moving on to other platforms too. The beautiful thing is that unlike in a lot of earlier console generations, most of the best JRPGs I'll be talking about in this video are playable on multiple consoles and PC too, so there's probably a way for most people to play these games. In fact, aside from the handful of exclusive, I've probably played most of these games on PC myself. Also, I decided to completely spoil my own video in my description section if you just want to see my 9 picks for what I believe to be the best JRPGs released this generation. These are the games I will most likely remember 10 or 20 years from now. I'm going to start with my picks for best games, and then talk about the other really good JRPGs before ending with the more niche stuff I've played that I like, but probably wouldn't really recommend to other people unless I knew more about their tastes. Hopefully this video will remind you of some great JRPGs that are available or introduce you to some new ones to get into. All that said, I'm going to start with the best Switch exclusive JRPGs, or the real reasons I decided to buy a Switch at launch. Beginning with the 2 new Xenoblade games that launched on the Switch, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which are both top-class JRPGs. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has a lot of eccentric blade designs from famous artists in Japan, and a bit of a lighter, more fun story influenced by classic manga and anime stories like Galaxy Express 999. The game was developed during the Wii U era and released near the beginning of the Switch lifecycle, so it is a little rough with the graphics and performance, but that doesn't hamper its amazing, somewhat complex gameplay in my opinion. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 takes place in a bleaker, war-torn world. It has one of the deepest and best battle systems I've seen in any JRPG and was nominated for Game of the Year awards. All of the Xenoblade games are so loosely connected, you don't need to play prior games in the series to enjoy any of the newer ones. So if you do own a Switch or are picking up a Switch 2 and recently discovered a love for JRPGs and haven't played these games yet, I can recommend them. Fire Emblem Three Houses, a social bloat-ridden entry in the long-running tactical JRPG series, is also an amazing game. Fire Emblem has always had relationship systems, but this game took a more time-influenced Persona-esque approach to developing your characters and their relationships. I'm not exactly a big fan of this aspect of the game myself, but what more than saves the game for me to the point where it makes my list is how well Intelligent Systems implemented the game's multiple story routes in the game's development. Fire Emblem Three Houses is almost like 3 games in one, and even skipping the social elements and just seeing the different stories was pretty cool and worth my time. The first ending I got with Edelgard in particular was really awesome and sticks with me as one of the coolest endings I've ever seen in any Fire Emblem game. Hashtag Edelgard did nothing wrong. Despite my issues with social bloat in JRPGs, I still think Fire Emblem Three Houses is a game I'll remember 1 or 2 decades from now, which is why it made the list. Now for the games that are multi-platform. In fact, this game was actually released on the PlayStation 4 and 3DS before the Definitive Edition launched on the Switch and other platforms. And that is Dragon Quest XI-S, Echoes of an Elusive Age. I've completed playthroughs of the game on the 3DS and the Switch, and it's a fantastic traditional turn-based JRPG in the strictest sense. It's got the late Akira Toriyama's art, Koichi Sugiyama's music, and Yuji Horii, perhaps the most influential force in defining what a JRPG is, behind the game's creation. Whether you play the game in 2D, 3D, or both, and I do think it's awesome that you can play the game so differently in one package. It's a charming, lengthy, and satisfying experience. It's also currently $40 on Steam and has gone as low as $20 on sales. Atlus's flagship mature JRPG, Shin Megami Tensei 5, launched as a Switch exclusive on November 12th worldwide, and it was already an awesome game when it first released. But then Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance released as recently as June 14th, 2024 on all the major consoles and PC. That game, which basically features a full-length game added to the original game, is not only a fantastic entry in the Shin Megami Tensei series, but excellent value too if you're as thorough in doing everything you can in a video game. Between the original and Vengeance, I've poured about 200 satisfying hours into the game. It features the Shin Megami Tensei signature demon fusion and negotiation mechanics. It's probably just me, but I find conversing with demons to be extremely entertaining in this game. The new route through the game develops the story a little bit better than the original route in my opinion. This game is open zone with numerous demons to recruit and Mimon to find for bonuses. Even if I personally prefer the more urban style of Shin Megami Tensei 1, 2, and 4 to the already blasted environments of Shin Shin Megami Tensei 3 and 5, it's still a great game worthy of being on this list. The price for this game has dipped below $40 on Steam in the past, and it will probably do so again in the future. Octopath Traveler 2 managed to become one of the top 10 best JRPGs I ever played, and there's no way it's not going on my list. The game, to me, is what Final Fantasy VI is to the Final Fantasy series, a near-perfect version of what it set out to do when the first Octopath Traveler was released as a Switch exclusive. Also, unlike the original game, it wasn't marketed and published by Nintendo in the West, so the game launched worldwide on all the major platforms except Xbox. The game's major features are a well-fleshed-out job system and a set of 8 characters with their own unique stories that develop their characters as well as the overall plot. This game improved the pacing of the original, developed the individual stories more, and improved the unique turn-based battle system over the original. Octopath Traveler 2 is, in my opinion, a modern-day masterclass on how to blend music and art to create extraordinarily memorable scenes in a JRPG. All 8 characters in this game had at least one amazing moment where they shined. The day and night system, and more importantly, the ability to instantly change between day and night, also added some variety to how you can interact with the game's numerous NPCs with path actions. And I'd say the NPC interaction with path actions is one of the most entertaining things about this game too, turning what's usually seen in most games as a distraction to something to look forward to in Octopath Traveler 2. My only qualm with the game's path action system is that you have to go to the bar to switch in party members to access path actions, which can be time consuming. If Octopath Traveler 3 is a thing, I'd love if they figured out how to make an 8-person active party work smoothly, like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 made the 6 to 7 character active party work, just so you wouldn't have to switch between party members anymore. Octopath Traveler 2 has dipped below $30 on Steam in the past, and it will probably do so again in the future. As an aside, I also love the original Octopath Traveler, which made a huge splash for reinventing the 2D pixel aesthetic on HD backgrounds. While the aesthetic isn't patented, Square Enix did copyright the term HD 2D with this game, and hasn't been shy about applying the brand name to a variety of new games and remakes. I actually recommend people start with Octopath Traveler 2, and then only if they love the game to go back and play Octopath Traveler with lowered expectations. Real-time tactical JRPG Unicorn Overlord released on March 8, 2024 on all the major platforms except PC. The game can most concisely, if not most accurately, be described as a pleasant fusion of Ogre Battle, Fire Emblem, and Final Fantasy XII's gameplay. The pieces move along the game field in real time, liberating key locations, but enter into an automated turn-based battle system when opposing sides collide. The automated combat takes place according to player-set AI commands, similar to Final Fantasy XII's Gambit system. Setting up the party's AI is a time-consuming process, but it can be extremely rewarding. Outside of the combat and war gameplay, you can develop the relationships of your characters with food and purchase equipment for them if you're into that. One of my favorite things about Unicorn Overlord is how they managed to make the game very open world after the beginning. Unicorn Overlord was my game of the year for 2024, and while Yasumi Matsuno's brilliant tactical JRPGs are still king for me, this game remains one of the best original tactical JRPGs I've ever played. It's definitely the best vanillaware game ever made in my opinion, and they've made some fantastic games. Unicorn Overlord is available between the $30 and $40 price range on multiple platforms except PC. While we're on the topic of great tactical JRPGs, Triangle Strategy is another fantastic game worth noting that launched as a Nintendo Switch exclusive before it became available on Windows and the MetaQuest platforms. It is brand new IP just like Unicorn Overlord, but plays more like Yasumi Matsuno's Tactics Ogre games, with the 3D fields, turn-based combat, and multiple ending paths. The character development and growth systems are completely different from Tactics Ogre though, which favorably distinguishes this game more from that one. Now, I personally did like Unicorn Overlord a little bit more, but this was also a great game worthy of being on this best list. There's a lot of creative ways to deal with enemies, and there's no permadeath to detract you from using really eccentric strategies. Replaying the game to see multiple endings can be a bit tedious, as there aren't any time skip options though. It's also important to note this game and the Octopath Traveler series are the products of Team Asano at Square Enix. The only people to have multiple, completely different games make my best list here during the Switch generation. Everyone's definition of a JRPG is a little different, but I'm putting Elden Ring on the best list too. Elden Ring is another another awesome game, but it's more of a borderline action JRPG than a pure JRPG to me. I put the Souls-type games like Elden Ring in the same kind of dungeon-crawling JRPG category as Kingsfield. Despite not actually being dungeon crawlers, they're still JRPGs to me. Elden Ring, however, is more like a huge open dungeon world, and thus gives players enough options to make the game much easier than its Souls predecessors, which has done a lot towards making the game more accessible for casual audiences. This is probably why the game has sold a staggering 30 million copies as of April 28, 2025. This is a game that actually can't be played on the Switch, but will be available as a complete edition with the DLC on the Switch too, and it's already available on every other major platform. And that's all for the most memorable and best JRPGs of the generation in my opinion. Plenty of other great games are worth mentioning though, even if they didn't make the cut for me. Mostly because they were just remakes or remasters of older pre-Switch generation games, or not quite good enough for me to consider as best for this list. A lot of these games are good enough to make other people's best list though, and I still really enjoyed many of these games in their time, so I'm going to talk about them. Out of the remakes and remasters, of special note is Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven, which is probably the best remake I've ever played for a game period, even if it isn't my favorite game out of all the remakes that came out in the Switch generation. Square Enix in particular was hands down the best at remasters and remakes, with Final Fantasy VII, Dragon Quest III HD 2D, Live Alive, Tactics Ogre Reborn, Star Ocean: The Second Story, Saga Frontier Remastered, Trials of Mana, and Romancing Saga Minstrel Song Remastered. A fantastic remaster of a remake with even more new content added to the original remake. Atlus also released Persona 3 Reload, which I didn't personally play because they didn't make any significant additions to the story from what I saw. But I love the original Persona 3, and this version of the game is sitting at a very impressive, overwhelmingly positive score right now on Steam. It's a pretty easy game to recommend to anybody. Gus Atelier Marie remake was also fun, but definitely a product of its time. Nintendo's updated versions of the original Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles Cross are also fantastic games. Xenoblade Chronicles Cross in particular got some amazing upgrades over the original game, which was already the best game on the Wii U in my opinion. Both Rune Factory 3 Special and Rune Factory 4 Special are also amazing games. Some other notable remasters of some of the more niche JRPG series of the 90s, like Lunar, Suikoden, Growlincer, and Front Mission, also released during the Switch generation. There were a lot of great games I enjoyed, but don't really consider best. As for games in this category, I'll start with the numerous Trails and Yeast games that released during the Switch generation. Falcom was just like an unstoppable JRPG factory when it came to releasing quality JRPGs throughout this entire period, almost maintaining an annual release schedule. I honestly couldn't tell you how a mid-sized Japanese developer like Nihon Falcom manages to push out so much quality when so many other bigger companies whine about games taking 6 years to produce. The Trails series saw releases of Trails of Cold Steel 4, Trails into Reverie, Trails Through Daybreak, Trails Through Daybreak 2, and Trails Beyond the Horizon in Japanese. Trails Beyond the Horizon is technically a Switch generation game as it released in Japan last year, but its English localization won't arrive until after the Switch 2 launch. I love the Trails series, but the individual games are kind of difficult to put on lists like this since you really need to play the other games that came before them to get the most out of them. If this video were about best JRPG series, the Trails series would be near the top. Ys 9 and Ys 10 also saw releases during this time period. One interesting thing about Falcom's Trails games is that they actually had a few months of exclusivity in Japan on the PlayStation 4 before they got worldwide releases on the rest of the platforms. It might be a stretch to call them JRPGs, but I consider the Monster Hunter series to be action JRPGs. I believe Monster Hunter World, Monster Hunter Rise, and Monster Hunter Wilds deserve to be mentioned. Kind of similar to the Trails series, I wouldn't call any of them individually special enough to make the list, but the series itself is great fun if you're into that hunting action RPG gameplay loop like I am. For a new entry in the Monster Hunter series to get on my best list, it would need to innovate significantly over the other games in the series and maintain its great quality. Only Monster Hunter Rise is actually playable on the Nintendo Switch, but I actually like it more than World and Wilds due to its aesthetics and more manageable map sizes. All the Switch generation Monster Hunter releases are extraordinarily popular and sold many millions of copies. Fire Emblem Engage also falls into the great but not best category for me. I love the game's nostalgic throwbacks to older Fire Emblem games, the more challenging tactical RPG gameplay relative to Three Houses, and the return to the less time-intensive social systems. But the hub activities were kind of bland and very repetitive between missions. I'm not a fashion expert nor a professional artist, but the main character's kitty toothpaste hair didn't exactly thrill me either. This was a one-and-done Fire Emblem game for me. Another game I enjoyed and thought was really good is Metaphor ReFantazio, which is another game released during the Switch generation that actually can't be played on the Switch. The game's battle system and archetype system were really fun. I liked the story and characters enough for the most part, especially the game's reference to Etrian Odyssey. The game's human enemies had really cool old art-inspired designs too. What killed the game for me were the Persona mechanics dealing with time and the Persona-esque social aspects. Ironically, the features Atlas was really pushing to get that juicy Persona audience to buy their game. And it definitely worked for the game's sales and reception. I just didn't feel like the game needed it, and it really only served to make the game feel 30 to 40 hours longer than it should have been. The main character's design also didn't really sell me on the fantasy vibe either, despite the game sort of branding itself as a fantasy, which made the game feel a bit more like a stale isekai anime to me than a fantasy. That's just me though. Team Asano's Bravely Default 2 is a really fun game that launched as a Switch exclusive before coming to PC, but I consider it inferior to what they accomplished in Octopath Traveler 2. The most fun parts of the game, with its numerous jobs and abilities, also really make the game's balance wonky. Still, the story is pretty good, and the sheer number of job classes gives player an incredible variety of gameplay options compared to what you get with the characters and the more limited job class options in the Octopath Traveler series. The game and series is still really good though, and it distinguishes itself well enough from other turn-based JRPGs to be worthy of continuing as its own series. It's just not as memorable as the first game was for what that game accomplished in its time. The Atelier series had some of its best games in the series, with Atelier Ryza 1 through 3 and Atelier Sophie 2 launching during the Switch generation. But similar to the Monster Hunter series, the games are just really good, consistent experiences and not really anything special I'd put on the best list. The most recent game, Atelier Yumiya, released just a few months ago, but personally I think the game's particle alchemy development mechanics ruined the alchemy system for me. It's still a fun game that took the open world design a step forward for the series, even if the alchemy itself took a step or two back. The Tales series had a really high point and some low points during the Switch generation. Tales of Arise sold an astronomical amount of copies and received many accolades as a high point in the series. I thought the game was great from a character, story, and action gameplay perspective, but the new healing system they put in the game was terrible and ruined it from being too notable for me compared to better Tales games I've played in the past. This game was released on all the major platforms except for the Nintendo Switch. The other two Tales games were mobile games that ended up being quickly shut down. Ni no Kuni 2, Level 5's action JRPG sequel to Ni no Kuni on the PlayStation 3, had incredible talent behind it with a former Studio Ghibli designer's art design and a soundtrack from the legendary Joe Hisaishi. A lot of people love this game. I have a lot of respect for Akihito Hino and Level 5. The Dark Cloud games were some of my favorite action JRPGs on the PlayStation 2 in the past, but neither Ni no Kuni 2 nor the original game really grabbed me with its gameplay. I'm really only mentioning this game here because a lot of people liked it, it sold and reviewed well, and even if I wasn't too crazy about the game myself, I still feel like the game was forgotten too quickly. There's probably somebody watching this video that didn't know about the game and would really enjoy it, so I wanted to mention it here. Now I'm going to talk about the more niche games that rated a little lower than a lot of the other games I've already talked about, but I still played them and enjoyed them for what they were. I loved Zonky Zero when I streamed it live after I was gifted the game on Steam. It's a wacky, real-time dungeon RPG with a unique growth mechanic revolving around developing resistances by dying from things. Naturally, I juiced the difficulty to max and died a lot to pretty much everything, which was pretty entertaining for my audience watching me live. You can die from traditional things like monster attacks to non-traditional things like not letting your characters go to the bathroom when they have to, among many other things. The puzzles are kind of annoying, and the game has a bit of a survival horror vibe, which was somewhat lost on me, but I still found the gameplay to be solid. Zonky Zero got mid to low review scores, and I can understand why, but I still think it's an underrated game that had some really cool ideas and should have sold a bit more than it did. Nipponichi's Disgaea 6 was a bit of a low point for the series, but Disgaea 7 was pretty good. The games are supposed to be silly tactical RPGs, but they're more about exploiting the mechanics and becoming stupidly overpowered. My favorite game in the series is Disgaea 5, but even that game is pretty much like the others, and I think the lack of innovation in the series over the years has hampered its growth. Nipponichi's other game, Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero, a sequel to Phantom Brave from 2004, was just as fun as the first game, but nothing I'm going to remember 1 or 2 decades from now. Rune Factory 5 was a fun game hampered by terrible performance issues, and even though I'm not a huge graphics guy, I wasn't too enamored by the game's graphics either. Square Enix's Harvestella had the opposite problem: beautiful graphics and smooth performance, but extremely forgettable gameplay. Personally, I preferred Rune Factory 5, but it was definitely a more disappointing entry in the series thanks to the aforementioned performance issues. If you want to play a great Rune Factory game, play Rune Factory 4 Special. On exactly June 5th, Rune Factory: Guardians of Azuma is one of the few third-party games that's launching physically on a game card on the Nintendo Switch 2, and while I'll be playing it on PC myself, it is a game I'm still looking forward to. Elusive Chronicle 100 Heroes was a pretty forgettable game for me. I wouldn't call it disappointing or bad, as I had lowered expectations for the game, but it took too much inspiration from Suikoden 2 for me to find it too interesting. It might be my nostalgia kicking in, but I think anybody would be better off just playing the new Suikoden 1 and 2 collection. I think the Suikoden games have better music and more dramatic story beats thanks to the camera angles during the high-stakes duels. If you really love Suikoden, you'll probably enjoy playing Elusive Chronicle if you lower your expectations a bit. I just feel like even with its dated 90s design aspects, the first two Suikoden games are better, but I haven't played those games since they launched on the PlayStation in the 90s, so take my opinion to be worth a grain of salt. Saga Emerald Beyond, unlike the Romancing Saga games, is extremely niche, but I loved the game's turn-based combat system. The entire game was basically its combat system though. No massive open world to explore, and even the zones were pretty small, even if they did offer enough choice to make multiple playthroughs more interesting. That makes this game extremely hard for me to recommend to other people. I always just tell people to play Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven, Romancing Saga 3, or Saga Frontier if they want to play an accessible gateway game into the Saga series. Visions of Mana is playable on everything except the Nintendo Switch. I enjoyed the game and I think it's the best brand new Mana game we've had in decades. But compared to the remake of Trials of Mana, the game did feel a bit more shallow. Sadly, I have a feeling it will probably be the last Mana game we'll see for a really long time due to not meeting Square Enix's exceedingly high sales expectations too. I'd personally love to see the Mana series go back to its local multiplayer roots with a brand new game, but I think those days are long past. I doubt anybody watching this video will remember this next game, but Brigandine Legend of Forcina was a really niche tactical JRPG published by Atlas in the West on the PlayStation that I loved. A fan-translated version of an update to that game called Brigandine Grand Edition with multiplayer support and new features is even more amazing if emulation doesn't offend you. Anyways, Brigandine got a brand new entry in the series during the Switch generation called Brigandine The Legend of Runergia. The game was developed by Matrix Software and published by Happynet. I really enjoyed this extremely niche game, but it's definitely the least popular game sales-wise that I felt was good enough to give an honorable mention in this video. The game is a tactical JRPG where you control one of 6 major powers and conquer territory by engaging in hexagonal grid combat with your Rune Knights and their monster units. Unfortunately, if you don't own a PC, Switch, or PS4, you won't be able to play this one. I won't talk about Sea of Stars, Wandering Sword, or any other indie RPGs that aren't actually made in Japan in this video, so that's all for me. You're bound to have a different opinion than me, so what are your favorite JRPGs released during the Switch generation? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.